Good morning, Drexel Hill Middle School students and staff and community members, distinguished guests and virtual audience. We're gathered in the auditorium today to take a break from our class and to put our holiday plans on hold to do something incredibly important, to fulfill our obligation and responsibility to pay tribute to the countless Americans who have died while serving in the military and defending the lives and liberty of us, fellow citizens, past, present, and future. It's with these thoughts in mind that we require everybody who's in the auditorium today to conduct yourself in a manner befitting of a memorial ceremony. If it helps, think about the way people normally act at a funeral when honoring a loved one. That is exactly what we're doing here today. We are honoring hundreds of thousands of loved ones that have died for our country. Today, you may hear performances and speeches that would normally be followed by applause. What I'm asking you today is that you show respect and appreciation by remaining silent. This ceremony is a time for all of us to focus on the sacrifices made throughout our country's history in the name of freedom, and to contemplate what role we each have as a citizen to remember that sacrifice. And now Mr. Mayerzak and our band. Memorial Day has not always been a holiday, and it isn't celebrated worldwide. So when did it start and why? The American Civil War was a catastrophic event in our country's history. The range of deaths is somewhere between 600 to 800,000 people in our country in a few short years fighting on our soil against each other. In towns across America, large populations of people left their home and never returned. So how might we recognize such loss over such a short period of time? In the years following the Civil War, across the country, citizens would gather to decorate the graves of the young soldiers who died during the war. The original celebrations were in fact called Decoration Day, which reminds us all of how we can and should pay respect to those who lost their lives in service. I want to talk today about the earliest recognition of Decoration Day. It was a parade that was held in Charleston, South Carolina in May of 1865, immediately following the end of the war. This parade was held by newly freed Black Americans who unearthed a mass grave of Union soldiers and reburied them respectfully, decorated the graves, and then held a vigil and a parade around the site. For those of us in the auditorium, in the virtual audience, this event happened so long ago that it can be kind of hard for us to picture what that looked like or what that felt like. Charleston, South Carolina had been a state that supported slavery. The emancipation of slaves happened in 1863, and 2 years later, the war ended. Newly freed people knew that there was a mass grave behind the stands at a local horse racing track. And I want you to remember, this was not a state that was historically friendly to Black Americans or newly freed slaves. This was not a state that was entirely happy to be on the other side of the end of the Civil War. At a place called the Washington Racecourse and Jockey Club, approximately 260 Northern soldiers who had been captured and held prisoner by the Confederate Army, mistreated, suffering, freezing, and starving to death, died together in their prison. They were held captive on an open-air field that looked like the center of a horse race track, or like a football field, with a fence around them. And with no regard for their lives, their dignity, or their families that they left behind, at the end of the war, they were, in a group, pitched together into a giant hole and covered with dirt together. 260 people. Newly freed Black people at the end of the Civil War, knowing that there was this mass grave, and in spite of the fact that they lived in a less than friendly state, took the time to dig up these soldiers, dig 260 individual graves, and rebury each person as an individual in an orderly and marked grave. Then, they organized a memorial service and a parade, including church groups, local community groups, families, and as many as 3,000 school-aged children, just like yourself, who gathered together flowers and marched to the gravesite to decorate the graves and pay honor to the fallen soldiers. Remember, these are soldiers who lost their lives in horrible conditions, fighting for the freedom of many people who they, quite frankly, had never met and never knew. Being a soldier is an act of bravery. It is an act of selflessness and personal sacrifice. It has been, it still is, and it always will be. Today, I also want you to think about how important it is to recognize the bravery of the people, regular citizens like you and me, who organized this memorial at the Washington Racecourse. They were living in a state that was historically slave-owning, just weeks after the end of the Civil War, and only 2 years from the Emancipation Proclamation that gave them their freedom. 2 years. Folks, 2 years ago, the 8th graders sitting in front of me were in 6th grade watching the Memorial Day Assembly on a Zoom, a YouTube video that I asked your 6th grade teachers to share in your Google Meets. I want you to think about any law that got passed 2 years ago. Is everybody on board with that law yet? Is there anybody who's resisting that law yet, still? Does anybody typically resist things that changed 2 years ago when you're in 6th grade? Now, I want you to imagine you're in the position of the people who organized this memorial service at the Washington racetrack. What would it take? What would it take for you to be a part of that group of people who had to open up that mass grave? The group of volunteers who had to dig 260 new individual graves and move those bodies against the wishes of many people in their community. Just think about how much time it would take to do that work and how you would feel in that community doing that. The bravery of these people had to be inspired by the respect and the love that they shared for those people who they knew suffered, were mistreated, and died as captives. So they had empathy. The memorial service at the Washington racetrack that I just described is often referred to, for those of you who study history, as the martyrs of the racetrack. If you're my age, you never learned about this in school, ever. It was not in your textbook. It wasn't even in my teacher's textbook when they were in college studying history. There are no photos from it, very few newspaper articles that survived or even covered the story. The event was completely washed out of history, and it existed only in the memories of the people who participated and the people who were there, who died long ago. The only reason that we know about it today is in 1996, which is not that long, it's long ago for you, it's not that long ago for me. In 1996, there was a historian named David Blight who uncovered a note that made reference to this event as he was doing research. And the reason that I include this in the words that I'm sharing with you today is because I need you to have this as an example, all of you, so that you can understand how fragile history can be, especially when the people who are telling the stories and documenting history choose to leave out key people and key events. So your job as a student is to learn always, and be curious always, and know that what you learn as you're growing up is going to be different than what your parents learned, and probably even better than what your teachers learned or experienced. Never lose sight of each person's ability to contribute to our collective knowledge, the world, and each person's historical perspectives. And now please turn your attention to our Drexel Hill chorus.
All across the country this weekend, elected officials in memorial wreaths at various sites in order to honor our fallen soldiers. This morning, as part of our ceremony, we are paying the same respect to this tradition at Drexel Hill Middle School. I am proud to be joined by 3 classmates who will help us with our wreath-laying ceremony. Michael Cavalli, Erlina Chessi-Portilla, Taylor Williams, and I are working today in the capacity of student administrators. Our student leadership team will present our memorial wreath at the base of the American flag. As in tradition, this will be followed by the playing of taps. At that time, we will pause for a moment of silence.
In closing this morning, I want to give our students an idea of the price that's been paid in the name of freedom locally. In the lobby of the Performing Arts Center at Upper Darby High School, there are memorial plaques that recognize members of the high school who left our community to serve our country and made the ultimate sacrifice with their lives. Among the names on the plaques is Robert Higbee, who would have been my second cousin. He never made it home from the Vietnam War. What strikes your eye when you look at these plaques is the sheer volume or number of names included on these memorials. Some of us know what it's like to lose a family member, a friend, even a classmate. No one in this room has had to know the pain of losing young men and women in such large quantities in such a short period of time. We have not had to learn how to help a community cope with such a great and tragic loss, and because of that, we are truly blessed to be living in this time. Our country is certainly not perfect for all of our citizens yet. However, what's been created through generations of selflessness, of bravery and sacrifice and memorial is a country of promise that every citizen has the potential and the capacity to be a part of the changes that will improve the lives of themselves and others, is the legacy of the gift of freedom, which was earned and continues to be earned and protected by our national heroes. The freedom to speak your mind and protest, no matter what party is in control of the government. How much would that be worth if you had to pay for that freedom? The freedom to have various news forms, various media inform us, the citizens of our country. Could you put a price on any of this? How about the freedom to practice a religion or not practice a religion if you choose? What would it cost to keep that? The next time you visit the high school and you pass through the lobby of the Performing Arts Center, I want you to take a moment to pause and reflect on the number of names and the lives of those people who lost their lives in service of our country for the promise of freedom. This is more than a trip down the shore on Memorial Day weekend, more than a barbecue or an extra 2 days off from school. Memorial Day exists to give our entire country time to pause, take a break from our routines, and recognize the family, the friends, and the students, and the neighbors who died or have been lost while serving in the armed forces. I want to thank our music department tremendously for the vocal performances and for the instrumental performances. Before the 8th grade came in, I was talking to our musicians today and just kind of remarking on the fact that when our 8th graders were in 6th grade, I was recording this Memorial Day presentation in my backyard. I had to wake up real early before anybody started their lawnmowers because my house was too noisy and my neighborhood was too noisy, and I had to make a solemn recording to share in our virtual classrooms when our 8th grade was in 6th grade. Last year, we could only get a portion of people in here in cohorts 4 and 5. And this year, I have students in front of me, students joining in their class virtually, children behind me, children in front of me, instruments and vocal performances. And for that, we're blessed as well. Thank you to our student administrators for serving us again today, for Rehan, Iqbal, Michael Cavalli, Erlena Chassi-Portilla, and Taylor Williams for the explanation of the wreath-laying ceremony and for participating. Thank you to the 8th grade members of our live assembly this morning. You have done a great job honoring this tradition. Thank you to our teachers always who guided you into this assembly with reverence, helping to arrange our seating and focus our attention. I want you all to please have a great holiday weekend. And I'll ask that as you exit the auditorium, please exit the same way that you entered, with honor, with respect, and in memorial. So teachers, when you are ready, you can begin escorting your classes back, starting from the rear right side and working way forward in the auditorium. Thank you.